previous teacher skills into practice in this session this afternoon. So the first question is, how can the professional learning needs of out-of-field teachers at various stages in their careers be recognised and accommodated? And we have three people who are going to offer a response: Monique, Allan and Trish. So given that we've got 20 minutes, I'm going to invite Monique first of all. You've got up to 5 minutes, if you like, to talk about your ideas and your experiences and perspectives. Thank you, Monique.
Fabulous. Thanks for that lovely and warm introduction. I was explaining before that I've been dipping in and out of the presentations over the last couple of days. I work in school. I'm a teacher at a school in Melbourne, and the subject that I teach is design and technologies. And if you're in New South Wales, that is TAS. And if you're in Queensland, that's ITD. And just even that difference across states of Australia has an impact on the subject that I teach, and also the teaching out of field phenomena that we've been discussing and experiencing. The question is talking about the different career stages of teachers, and I'd like to draw a line and just suggest that ITE courses have a role to look after the needs of our graduates, and they need to be prepared for workforce needs and demand. So the questions for our universities, for the teachers at that early career stage, is, do our ITE courses adequately prepare our students that are coming into teaching for our workforce needs and demands? Now, if you are a Year 12 student in Victoria and you wish to become a design and technologies teacher, now I'm a really fabulous design and technology teacher. I inspire all my students to become teachers, but none of them can choose to study in Victoria to become a design and technologies teacher. There is no course available at undergraduate level. Now that's not right. It's not right at all. So why aren't they available? If there's a shortage of Victorian teachers in the subject design and technologies, why isn't there a course available to meet that workforce demand? Okay, I know that's a big question, and we've got a big brains trust here, and there's always a call to action when you're attending something like this. And the next question is, are we preparing our teachers who are in their careers for the various career stages? Now, professional learning is about nourishing our growth, really. We want to have enough to keep us engaged in our career. Of course, we want teachers to spread their wings and teach other subjects. We want science teachers to be engaged with STEM. We want them to have that opportunity. We want technologies teachers to be additionally developing with new technologies. So are those postgraduate options enough to suit the needs of our teacher workforce and keep them engaged? Because if we're not keeping our teachers engaged with further professional learning, then that's an issue in itself, isn't it? And I know that's another really big question, but again, is there enough in the subject area design and technologies? Now, if you have a little bit of a look on Google, I'm going to put some resources in the chat after I've finished talking. I can't multitask that well, but if you have a bit of a Google, and if you're a current teacher in Victoria and you want to be more diverse in what you teach, or you want to add another method area, it is hard, and it's too hard. It's too hard to be able to do that. So that pushes out of field teachers in a space that's uncomfortable. Now, no school wants to put teachers in an uncomfortable space where they don't have the resources to teach our students. That's not what we're on about in educational schools. So I think that, I don't know about the time or how long I've got, but I feel like I'm almost there. Are we meeting the needs? No. So who's going to provide the education and resources? Are our tertiary institutions going to? Now, I know there is a big calling for design and technologies teachers to provide training. So some of our teachers, our needed teachers in schools, are actually leaving school to become education consultants. okay, and to make sure that they can train teachers coming in. I have a second job. I teach at Southern Cross University, and I teach teachers, okay, at that level. And I know that there is a shortage of people to teach in that method area. Okay, it's a cyclic, never-ending, multi-layered, complex problem. My call to action for you, everyone who's listening now, because you're all inspired, you're all working in amazing places that can create a change and to do something. So what will you do post this conference? Now that you've got all this information, what will you do in your workplace to contribute to the change? Okay. And I think that's probably the most important question, because if you're doing that at all the different levels, you are working to support graduate teachers, new teachers, early career, people who are looking at diversifying their method areas and adding on. And, you know, all those little things contribute to slowly moving this problem, because it's a big beast, into something positive. Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you, Monique. Very interesting. Move along to Allan, please.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me. I found lots of what Monique had to say there very interesting, and I've probably come at it from maybe a slightly different angle, just to present some thoughts. We had a beginning of a consultation earlier on in the year from the federal government around initial teacher education. And one of the big points and questions around that was, how do we attract high quality candidates into ITE? And I think one of the problems that we have when we think about out of field teachers is that stigma, that reactionary filling a gap type idea that comes when we talk about out of field teachers. And I think one of the things that we need to be very cognizant of when we're talking about equipping out of field teachers is not just equipping them, but how do we attract high quality out of field teachers into roles? And so many times it becomes about a timetabling issue within a school, and it becomes about a jigsaw puzzle that kind of fills gaps. But the reality is that we ought to be thinking about stepping back a little bit and thinking about how do we attract high quality candidates in to fill those spaces. Because I think that one of the challenges in the space is, we know, to Monique's point, that we have a declining number of maths and STEM educators coming out prepared to be teachers. That number is declining, and it has continued to decline. So we know that this issue is not going to go away, and it's not going to go away quickly. And so I think the question of high quality candidates into the roles is really important. I think the other thing that we need to think about in that question of professional learning is what we've learned and what's changed. The reality is that we all sit here on Zoom today. 20 months ago, we probably would have been in the same room, and we probably would have been able to have a conversation around a table. We have learned in education how to make use of technology. It may well not be perfect, but we've certainly adapted to it. And I think we need to think about how we deliver professional learning on the backdrop of what we've learned in the last 18 months, 2 years, because what we do know is that one size does not fit all in professional learning contexts. We know that the needs of rural, regional and remote schools can be very different to that of metropolitan schools. We know that the needs of one metropolitan school to another can be very different. And in fact, we all know that the needs of one classroom to another can also be very different. So I think there's a need for us to redefine and rethink what we mean when we talk about professional learning. We become very accustomed to this extraction mode of professional learning. You go out and you do a twilight course, or you go out and you do a course somewhere, and then you come back and you apply it in the classroom. But I think what we need to be thinking about is, how do we have a much more on-the-job experiential journey for not just out of field teachers, but all professional learning? How do we embrace the micro-credentialing culture that's going on, the coaching culture that we see in the corporate world so often, the on-the-job support that we now can offer both virtually and physically? And so I think that whole idea of how do we actually pull on the power of a community of practice, and a community of practice that is sustainable. That whole idea of how do we offer support. We need to understand, and I'll maybe kind of wrap up here, we need to understand the professional learning needs of out-of-field teachers better as well. I think that often we have a very narrow preconceived idea of what the learning needs of out-of-field teachers are, and we actually don't stop to understand them, taking into account context, taking into account experience, taking into account strengths and passion areas. And so there is a space and a need for us to understand the professional learning needs better.
Thank you, Allan. Thank you. I agree with many of your points. Trish, over to you.
Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to speak this afternoon. I think what the former two speakers have said really resonates too in terms of geography. And I think particularly for the subject of geography, where we have the highest percentage of out-of-field teachers, that's 40% in Australia. And I think for early career teachers, particularly in geography, chances are that they have done their initial teacher education in the social sciences area. They're in that umbrella, the HASS umbrella, humanities and the social sciences. So that could involve them doing geography, history, commerce, economics, any combination of those. What we're also seeing is that we might have students who've got a background, for example, in sociology and not necessarily any of those things, and they're going into the classroom to teach humanities. So I think the key in teacher training is to actually look at, how those subjects might be approached. I also think that the students themselves need the initial teacher training students need to be aware that they could be asked to teach a broad range of subjects. So I think that's one thing to look at in particular, and the mentoring, yes, is therefore really, really essential. Where we've seen success, I think, with schools is where they do have that support, and particularly from other teachers who might be able to mentor them, model for them, co-teach in classrooms. That could be very successful, rather than just sort of leaving them to throwing them in the deep end where they may not have that. So of course that's going to vary, as has been said, from one context to another in terms of the school, the region, and so on. Particularly for geography, the areas that we think need looking at are those specific things where there may be other aspects that aren't necessarily used in other humanities subjects. So for example, the field work, an essential skill in geography, and it has a particular approach. It is not an excursion. So that's something that needs to be addressed specifically in that initial teacher education. Similarly, we're seeing increasing use of geospatial technology in the approach to geography. And, geography has a significant STEM component, and yet it's often a subject that's ignored in the STEM umbrella, which something ACTA's working hard to change. And again, that's something else that needs to be incorporated, not just for teachers in their early career stages, but that's something that really we need to be developing in teachers across the whole range of experience, because it's something that's changing quite rapidly, and a lot of teachers don't feel comfortable with those skills and developing those skills. And yet it's something that we are now, from next year in Victoria, having mandated in terms of field work for VCE. So, it's not just the early career teachers, but yeah, definitely need a lot of support in that area.
Great, thank you, Trish. I've been trying to keep an eye on the chat, and I'm sort of struggling to read it all and listen and take notes and watch the time. So I'm hoping that some of you have been reading the comments in the chat, because they're extensive and detailed. And it might offer you something that you want to comment on when you do the Mentimeter feedback as well. So some of the points that seem to be arising here is the tension between what is the role of the university in preparing these teachers before they go out into schools versus what should happen once they're in a school. And that there's clearly different views on how that might work or not work. There's different requirements in different states. We've heard about registration requirements. So it's actually not a simple answer to actually suggest that universities should actually be better preparing our pre-service teachers to teach out of field. So it seems that it's more about what's going to happen to these students when they enter the workforce and they get their allocation and they start teaching and find that for whatever reason, they've suddenly got a load that doesn't reflect what they thought they'd be doing. And that seems to me to be something that perhaps we need to address more in the school context. And all of you have suggested mentoring, coaching, professional learning in various guises.